Hello, everyone, and welcome to this week's episode of the Align Wellness Podcast. I am your host, Dr. Torrie Thompson, and this week we are diving into something that I think is I don't want to say a way bigger problem than we maybe have thought, but it is something that we see so prevalently in my line of work and in the labs that I do, yet you don't hear a lot of people talking about it. So this week we are going to talk about pesticides and herbicides, and we're talking about common ones, not off the wall, little things used here and there. We're talking about big agriculturally used pesticides and herbicides. And I've looked at, gosh, probably thousands and thousands of labs at this point, and I run a ton of environmental toxin panels. So, an environmental toxin panel, what it does is it actually looks at what toxins are stored in someone's body. And these are environmental toxins like pesticides, herbicides, plastics, VOCs, and we can see how much someone has stored in their body, and then you can track it as you detox it to the point where you can get those guys down within a safe zone. So, one of the most common things that I see, and I would say 9 out of every 10 people, if not more, has some level of pesticides or herbicides in their body, and usually a combination of several. And so these are something that we see a ton of, and maybe, things that people perceive as bigger threats, plastics, VOCs, some of these endocrine disruptors. I would say we see pesticides more in these labs. So when we're looking at pesticides and herbicides, we use a ton of them here in the United States. It's estimated that we use about 1 billion pounds of pesticides annually here in the United States. And that's really agriculturally and within stuff people use in their own homes. But we don't really regulate too many of them. We use lots of variations of them. And there are some negative health effects. Some of them have been banned in other countries, but we still use them here in the US. And more research is starting to come out on how these things affect our bodies. Several linked to cancer, hormone disruption, thyroid imbalances. They're not necessarily nice, and they're very, very prevalent in our ecosystems, in our food, in our water, in our products. So we're going to go over what they are, where you find them, and then what we can do to one, detox them, and two, prevent them from building up in your system. So, what are pesticides? What are herbicides? So, pesticides are chemicals used to kill pests. Very simple, right? So, they're used to kill bugs, insects, fungi, and then herbicides are used to kill unwanted plants. So this is often used to kill weeds or prevent weeds from happening or growing in our gardens or on, agricultural fields. So these are things like, glyphosate, atrazine, 2,4-D, some of the big guys. But really you can link most of these to pesticides and herbicides. So where are these found? The most common way we get exposed to these is food, right? So was your food sprayed with a pesticide or herbicide prior to consumption? So we things like wheat, oats, corn, beets, a lot of the veggies, berries, all sprayed heavily, or the non-organic versions are sprayed heavily. We get it from the water. So if you live in an area that is a big agricultural area, we are finding high amounts of pesticides in your water, in your tap water. And so things like atrazine and glyphosate have been found in much of the Midwest water supply. So even if you don't live by a farm, you eat organic, water can be a source of these pesticides and herbicides. Soil. So one of the most common ones we see in terms of long lasting in the soil is a chemical metabolite called DDA. And that is a DDT metabolite. So basically, DDT was banned in the 70s, but we're still seeing it show up in people's body. And the hypothesis is that it's still in the soil. The half-life's around 40-ish years. So after 40 years, only half of it has broken down. So we see that in the soil. And then, of course, a farm that is using pesticides and herbicides, you expect to find that in the soil as well. And then you've got blowover, so the air. So if an organic farm and a non-organic farm are next to each other and they're spraying pesticides on the non-organic, you can find a little bit generally on the organic stuff just because it blows in the wind. Then we've got household products. So of course we've got our weed killer, our pre-emergent, our insecticides, so bug spray, bug killers, roach killers, ant killers, flea and tick Preventatives and medication, as well as, using that around the yard, can all contain some of these very harmful ingredients. So the first and probably most famous is glyphosate. Glyphosate is the infamous Roundup chemical, and has been around a long time. It's been around since the 1990s, and it's used on wheat, oats, corn, soy, canola, sugar beets, used very heavily. And what had to happen, and we'll talk about this a little bit more, is we had to genetically modify crops to be able to withstand this heavy use of pesticides. So you're generally going to find GMO crops with heavy glyphosate use because they couldn't survive without being genetically modified. And then because wheat and oats and corn are used so heavily in our processed foods, we find them in things like, cereals, crackers, granola bars, snacky foods, breads can all contain levels of glyphosate. And then our lawn and garden products, a lot of the, Roundup pre-emergent weed killer, is going to be glyphosate derived. So there are a lot of health effects that are being studied and have been studied on what glyphosate can do. It's linked to gut dysfunction. It's been shown to act as an antibiotic, killing the good guys in our gut. It can cause the tight junctions in the gut to be damaged, which can lead to leaky gut. We're seeing liver and kidney damage. The World Health Organization has classified it as a possible carcinogen. It's linked to being an endocrine disruptor and interfering with our sex hormones, and then is a possible contributor to neurodevelopmental issues. It's linked to being a neurotoxin. So there are two big studies that have looked at glyphosate. One was in 2019, and it was a meta-analysis, and it linked glyphosate to an increased risk of a cancer called non-Hodgkin's lymphoma. And then a study in 2013 looked at what glyphosate did to the gut, and that's where they found the antibiotic-like activity in the gut. So glyphosate, probably the most common, but the next one we're going to talk to, or glyphosate's the most frequently talked about, but atrazine I think is actually the most common. So atrazine is also another um, pesticide. So it's linked to, or it's found in cornfields. So you see this a lot on non-organic corn products. So whether it's just corn, corn chips, some sort of corn product, also sugarcane, and then it's used on really pretty grasses and lawns. So we see this in a lot of golf courses. And so the Midwest has a lot of this. We find this very heavily in the water supply. You can look on the EWG and see if this is something that is in your water. And it is, I think this one is one I see far more often than glyphosate. Atrazine, you find this in most people, to be honest. So you've got, of course, your drinking water. They do not run this in standard city tests. So your city report that they publish, they're generally not looking for atrazine. And then it's in a lot of lawn products. So people often go, oh, I don't want to buy Roundup because of the glyphosate. So then they go to something that maybe has atrazine in it. Um, so atrazine has been linked to massive hormone disruption. There was a study done in 2002, so a long time ago now, that the frogs that were exposed to atrazine developed both male and female sex organs. So we've seen, hormone imbalances, also linked to infertility, thyroid disruption, neurodevelopmental delays in kids, and then possible link to cancer. The EPA says that atrazine is one of the most common toxins or contaminants in drinking water. Then we have the organophosphate family. And so the organophosphates are basically a big category of pesticides pesticides. And they're the most commonly used pesticides really around the world. So we see these in a lot of produce. So apples, peaches, grapes, broccoli, bell peppers can be sprayed with the organophosphate family. We see this a lot in garden insecticides. So whether it's ant spray, cockroaches, some sort of insect preventative or insect killer that you can get. Mosquito fogging, so whether it's a service or mosquito spray for yourself personally can contain these organophosphates, and then agricultural fields, of course, where there's fruit and vegetable farming. So these guys, the organophosphates, have been linked to neurodevelopmental toxicity and especially harsh on early childhood and damaging during pregnancy. They've seen a link to lower IQs, chronic fatigue, and neurological symptoms in adults. We've seen neurotransmitter imbalances, asthma and respiratory issues, and possible carcinogenic effects. Then we've got 2,4-D. 2,4-D is actually a part of the original chemical of Agent Orange. It's a piece of that. And so we find this also in lawn and golf course products, right, to kill. And it's used on cornfields. It's often going to be with glyphosate. You tend to find these two together. And so this is going to be found in weed and feed products, so pre-emergence and weed killers. We see this a lot. In neighborhoods. You can see this residentially in neighborhoods when people have really pretty lawns that they spray all sorts of products on with lawn services or gardeners. So 2,4-D has been linked as a possible carcinogen. It's linked to non-Hodgkin's lymphoma, similar to glyphosate. It's an endocrine disruptor linked to birth defects and thyroid hormonal imbalances. So the International Agency for Research on Cancer classifies 2,4-D as a possible human carcinogen, and studies from the NIH linked to an increased cancer risk among farmers. So all of these that we've talked about so far are not off the wall. These are things that in an environmental toxin panel can be tested for and are found quite frequently. Then we've got the permethrins, and these are found in usually insecticides. We find it in lice shampoo, mosquito sprays, flea and tick treatments for pets, flea and tick medicine, the flea collars, also used agriculturally on fruits and vegetables. But it's going to be hiding in things in bug sprays, often, DEET free or safe. They might not have DEET in it, but it can have the permethrins. It can be in treated clothing or, the insect repellent gear, pet collars that prevent fleas and ticks. And these are linked to neurotoxicity, headaches, dizziness, cognitive effects, hormone disruption, asthma and allergies. And this has been found to accumulate in fat and breast milk. So the CDC and EPA have warnings on this, and they found documented neurological symptoms with repeat exposure. And so all of these are things that you can go to, Home Depot and buy or get your hands on these. Most of these are not things that are only used agriculturally. These are often things that we can find in our own products as well. They are, of course, used agriculturally very heavily, but they are things that we can get our hands on. So, if you look at crops back 100 years ago versus now, the crops 100 years ago or just organic crops really can't withstand or couldn't withstand the pesticide use that they withstand today. And that is because we have genetically modified our crops. So when you spray a ton of glyphosate on an organic plant, the plant dies. It can't withstand excessive amounts of pesticides. So what did we do? So what we did is we started genetically modifying crops to be able to withstand it. So what they do is they take the DNA in the lab to give plants specific traits. So they were able to give plants specific traits to survive heavy pesticide or herbicide spraying, basically making them more tolerant to that. And so, before the GMO crops, you couldn't spray pesticides directly on the plant without killing them. But with the GMO technology, things like Roundup, ready seeds were created. Monsanto put these out. So basically you could spray tons of Roundup or glyphosate on it and it wouldn't kill the plant. So now we're seeing, with the rise in genetically modified crops, you're seeing the rise of pesticide use because the plants can withstand it. So they sprayed more and more pesticides, hoping to kill the weeds off. But unfortunately, what that did is really create stronger and stronger weeds. So we have to spray more and more pesticides. And so what we've seen through the use of genetically modified crops is we're seeing far more pesticides and herbicides being sprayed, which then can end up in our waters, ending up, in places that we didn't intend for it to be. Um, and we found glyphosate in urine, they found it in breast milk, they found it in umbilical cords. So it is something that is quite a big problem within the population of, having these high exposures for a prolonged period of time. So the environmental impact that this heavy use of pesticides, there's of course a huge human impact, but the environmental impact is equally as bad. We're seeing, with this high use of pesticides and herbicides, we're seeing super weeds. So farmers are having to use stronger and stronger and stronger and more toxic chemicals to prevent the weeds and kill the weeds. We're seeing the soil lose a lot of the bacteria and the nutrients in the soil. So soil becoming a little more quote unquote dead. We're seeing a loss of biodiversity, right? We're seeing our bees and our pollinators drop off because of this. Um, the GMO agriculture really does create a cycle of dependency for more and more spraying, more genetically modified seeds. So we are getting farther and farther away from truly just, the raw, clean farming. So the biggest GMO crops that we see sprayed with pesticides are going to be corn, soybeans, cotton, and sugar beets. Those are the big guys. Wheat would be up there as well. And those are things that you really want to avoid genetically modified. There is a bit of a trickiness with the labels. So if something is organic, that basically takes into account that it cannot have been sprayed with pesticides and it cannot be genetically modified. So that is kind of the umbrella term that you want to look for. Genetically modified, free, or non-GMO. If it's non-GMO project verified, that means that it is not genetically modified, but it does not mean it's organic. So it could have been sprayed with pesticides or herbicides. So you do want to go, especially for those big guys, you want to go organic just so it umbrellas that it's, of course, not genetically modified and not sprayed with pesticides. So many of these things that we use here in the United States are banned in the EU, but very legal here. So atrazine, the guy that we see on, used in weed pre-emergence and sprayed on corn, was banned in the EU in 2004. Still sprayed here, very heavily used on corn. Then we've got paraquat banned in 2007 in the EU, still widely used in the US. Then we have the permethrins. Those are strictly limited in the EU, so there are limitations on it still used, but not nearly what we do. It is widely used here in the household pest control. So what do we do about it? What can we do? The beautiful thing of pesticide use is you can't control it, but we can really dictate how we spend our money. And, your dollar really is your voice. So the biggest and probably most important thing is choosing organic. It is so, so, so important, especially of those big foods, corn, oats, wheat, beets, sugarcane, and then the Dirty Dozen vegetable list. So every year the EWG puts out the 12 most sprayed fruits and vegetables. Those are the guys you really, really want to buy organic. It is so important, and I know it is a little bit more expensive. However, organic just means you are not getting these pesticides, and these can create a whole bunch of issues down the road. High environmental toxin loads have been linked to, of course, cancer, hormone disruption, but now is being looked at as a big culprit of Parkinson's, ALS, several neurodegenerative diseases. So really important to try to rid your system and not get any of these in. So really, buying organic and buying local. You can go to your farmer's market and find often a lot of local farmers that are organic farmers. And then you're supporting local and again, buying organic. Um, you know, the tricky part of going to the farmers markets is to get a USDA organic label. It is very difficult. It costs a lot of money. They go through very long, practices and testing. And a lot of little local farmers either haven't done it yet, don't have the finances to do it, or are kind of in the process. So talk to your local farmers at your farmers market and learn what their practices are. And sometimes it might not be someone that's USDA organic, but you might learn that they're not using pesticides. They're big on regenerative farming or, you know, whatever practices they're important to you, but the biggest thing is that they maybe don't use pesticides. That's something, again, USDA organic can be tricky for these guys, little farmers to get. Something else, so then, is washing your produce. I wash all of our produce very well, even organic, and that is because, of course, you can't control what it was grown next to, what was in the water that was used, all of that. So you want to wash all of your veggies, organic or not, and of course, if it's a non-organic, you definitely want to wash those. So you can do a really easy DIY wash, which is just a little bit of vinegar and baking soda with water, and soak for 15 minutes. Is it perfect? No, but it has been shown to, lower the pesticides on the surface and then get rid of any bacteria or microbes that are on the vegetable. The other thing you could do is you could grow your own food. You might, do little pots in the backyard rather than, doing the big scale greenhouse and all that. But you will find that some things are really easy to grow. Just make sure you're buying non-GMO organic seeds. And of course, buying soil that's not coming from, not a Miracle Grow soil or one of the soils that has these weed pre-emergence and all that in the soil. Something that is probably my number one priority for anyone to do when you're really looking at your health is drinking filtered water. So if your water has pesticides or herbicides inside of it, you come from an area that's used heavily agriculturally, it's a likely chance that you've got it in your water. You want to do reverse osmosis water. And you can get under the sink reverse osmosis filters for a few $100s. You can also buy a countertop RO system from someone like AquaTrue, and they are going to pull everything out. The most important thing with reverse osmosis water is that it is remineralized. So the way that RO or reverse osmosis works is it pulls everything out of the water. Everything, even the minerals. So you want to have an alkalizing piece or a remineralization piece on the end of it to make sure that minerals are added back in to get your water back to an alkaline state. So it's not, your body's not going to pull minerals from your own body to help with water absorption. So remineralization is key to RO, but having a water filter, so reverse osmosis is the gold standard. You could also do things like a Boro that will pull most everything out, formerly known as Berkey, now Boro. That is another great water filter. Your refrigerator filter, not going to cut it. A Brita, definitely not going to cut it. Many of these water filters are not going to pull most of these toxins out. So you want to invest in a quality water filter that is actually filtering, pulling all of that. The next thing is replacing your garden products. So going through your garage and getting rid of weed killers and pre-emergence and replacing with soil that is just, an organic soil, replacing with non-toxic products. And there's so many brands nowadays that have non-toxic, fertilizers and, weed killers and all of that. Do they work as great? No, no, they don't. But you're also not, making your yard this super toxic place because what happens is you go walk around barefoot or your pets go walk on your yard and it can all be absorbed in. So you want to replace with, non-toxic versions. And then there are, natural pest deterrents. So we use a company called Wondercide that is all essential oil based that you can use for mosquito stuff. They have cockroach and ant spray and all of that, as well as a flea and tick. So they're all essential oil based. You can use things like neem oil and peppermint, citronella. All of these work really well. But again, there is no equally as effective as the toxic chemical stuff in the natural world. You can find things that work great. They usually work for a shorter period of time, but generally you're not going to see that, no weeds grow in or no pests are in your yard. And also remembering that a lot of these pests have a place in a healthy yard. Our yard is very I've never used any pesticides or any toxins in my yard, and we have a ton of bugs. You have worms, ants, we've got grubs, all sorts of things in a healthy, soil. And with that, you find toads and lizards and snakes and all sorts of animals that are there because you've got a healthy ecosystem within your soil. So, some really great resources on non-toxic for the home, of course, is the EWG. EWG, you can see how they rate all the way from, being a score to then EWG verified. That means that there's nothing in there that is any concern for our health with the current research and data that we have now. So the EWG will rate something on a scale of 1 to 10, 1 being the lowest, 10 being the highest. Anything in the green, you're going to be okay. Anything yellow, really question it, and then red, I always steer clear. So looking from there and then finding local sources. I think it's really cool to go to the farmers market and go to these, farmer co-ops and learn about your farmers, support them. And you can often find better tasting food. Usually better tasting food, it's usually cheaper, and you are supporting your local community by doing so. So what do we do? Does this stuff just go away? How do you get it out of your system? So, a lot of these pesticides, because the exposure rate is so high, just sit in our systems. So, that's why I recommend someone running a toxin panel to see what is in your body, because then you can go, okay, I you can evaluate what exposure you have. Is there something that's hiding, or is this an old exposure? And then you can detox it out of the system. So that is that toxin panel is a urine sample, very easy to do, and it gives you pesticides, herbicides, and can lay out what where they are, how high they are, and it gives you many of them. We can look at all of the organophosphates, we can look at the premethrins, we can look at DDA, the metabolite of DDT, we can look at 2,4-D, atrazine, glyphosate, so many of them we can see. So really recommend that. But the other things to do is just always make sure your body is in detox state. So one, eating clean, eating lots of cruciferous vegetables to support detoxification. So broccoli, cauliflower, cabbage, all of these cruciferous guys are important in liver detoxification. Always being hydrated, right? Keeping hydration with minerals in your body. And then infrared sauna. The infrared sauna has been shown through so much research to be able to help detox us, to be able to help move these things out of the system. And where the majority of the benefits lied, well, was 4+ times a week for 30-minute sessions is really where the maximum benefit was in terms of cardiovascular health, in terms of brain health and detoxification. So infrared sauna, the study was infrared. The dry sauna does, work similarly. Infrared can just penetrate a little bit deeper without getting as hot. But doing a sauna session regularly, also exercise, getting out, sweating, moving, getting blood flow through the body helps keep you detoxed. And then, again, if there is a buildup, you need to go through and use some binders and detox tools to get these things out of the system. Once you've gotten them out, then just having saunas and liver support and, that kind of stuff does work at preventing it. But you do want to go in and actively pull it out if there is a big toxic load. So these pesticides are something I hope to see changing. Hopefully, we'll see a day where we don't use these as much. But in the meantime, it's really about buying organic when you can, especially if you eat the outside of it, going and growing your own food if possible, buying local, and then really replacing the products around your house. You'd be shocked to see the 2,4-D, the atrazine, the glyphosate, the premethrins, all of these things in products that are probably sitting in your garage. So going through, getting rid of those and starting to swap over to the non-toxic versions is really the way to set yourself up for health, your yard up for health, your family up for health. So hopefully you guys enjoyed this, and I will see you next week.